Hi there, thanks for tuning in. I'm Jamie from TST Prep, and today I'm going to talk about speaking strategies for success, in particular on question number 3, that academic reading and lecture. Well, why don't we jump right in? Okay, so today we're going to talk about question 3. We're going to go over the criteria. What are TOEFL raters listening for in good responses? We're going to listen to some sample responses and analyze them according to that criteria. It will definitely help you learn and grow and know how to model your awesome TOEFL response. Again, my name is Jamie. I'm a speaking specialist at tstprep.com. So you can see here, I've got a long history of experience teaching, specifically specializing with English of speakers of other languages. In terms of the TST Prep website, I do the speaking evaluations, as well as I teach group and private classes. So check out our products. We really want to help support you to get your TOEFL score as quickly and easily as possible. Now, it's not an easy task, but certainly with professional help and support, it can be a much more productive and effective process. Today, we hope to help you gain a deeper understanding of how to structure your response to TOEFL speaking question 3. We're going to analyze the difference between high and low level responses and learn from some student samples. Now, right now, there's an awesome opportunity for you. And that is, you can book a private 30-minute one-on-one speaking evaluation. Typically, you can see the cost is $29, still a pretty good deal. Right now, you can grab this opportunity for only $9. I mean, that's an amazing sale price. In the speaking evaluation, you'll likely meet me. And what we'll do is we'll get to know each other a little bit, and then you will respond to 3 sample TOEFL speaking questions. After I hear your responses, I'll be able to share with you your strengths, but we'll mostly focus on your weaknesses, where you need to focus on improving. And I'll give you specific strategies and feedback, how to improve your weaknesses for optimal success. And I'll advise you if I think you would benefit from any further professional help. So this promotion is only valid till June 1st. Jump on it now and let's get started on this TOEFL journey. So what do you know about TOEFL speaking question number 3? Let's go ahead and look at the basic structure. So this is our first of 2 academic related speaking questions. So the structure of this question is that we first have an academic reading, and then it's followed by an academic lecture. The basic overview is that you are going to explain the academic topic introduced in the reading and describe the main points about the topic described in the lecture. Some logistical things. You have about 50 seconds to read the reading passage. After that time, the reading disappears and you do not get another opportunity to see it. The lecture, the listening component, typically ranges between 1 and 2 minutes long. You're going to listen and take notes to that lecture. When the lecture finishes, then the question will pop up on the screen. You have 30 seconds to prepare your response and ultimately 60 seconds to speak. Now, let me just share some of my personal thoughts about question number 3. Quite often, you're going to be introduced to an academic theme or topic that you have never heard of before. The academic topics could range from any academic subject area. Quite often, we hear lectures from business, biology, sociology, psychology. However, I've occasionally heard lectures from history, drama, theater, a whole myriad of academic topics. So, first of all, You can never prepare yourself to know all of the vocabulary and the related themes in your questions because you simply can't predict the topic or theme you'll encounter. And here's a really important point that I want to share with you today. Quite often, when the reading pops up on the screen, I am introduced to a topic, a term that I have never heard of in my life. Me, as a native English speaker my entire life, I've never heard of these words. In fact, honestly, I've learned a lot of content and information just by doing TOEFL practice questions. Well, I share that with you honestly because I often think that students feel frustrated with themselves. They feel like, oh, if only I knew more about biology, or, oh, God, I really have to expand my vocabulary. If I had more vocabulary, that's not quite honestly the case here. The reason for me saying that is because as a native speaker, if I've never heard of the topic or theme, then how can, as a non-native speaker, you be expected to know all these words and their meanings? That's the true challenge of TOEFL. TOEFL tests your ability to deal with content that's unfamiliar to you, to learn strategies of working with vocabulary that you may not fully understand, and to summarize this information in a confident manner. Again, even when it's outside of your comfort zone or outside of your skill set or knowledge. So that's the challenge. Rather than approach this question thinking, I need to be a specialist in all of these academic areas, so I'm prepared no matter what question I encounter, I think you have to go more with a strategy or approach. I'm likely going to see something I've never heard of before. How can I, best prepare myself to deal when I don't fully feel confident and comfortable understanding something, but to use some strategies and techniques to act as if I got this. All right, so let's get busy. Today we're going to look at a sample question number 3. So you can see here on the screen, we have some directions, and then we have that academic reading. The title, Compassionate Consumerism. Okay, so I'll be honest with you guys. I know both of these words individually. I know what it means to be compassionate or to have compassion for someone. That is a word that's part of my vocabulary. And while I'm not a business specialist, I understand about the word consumerism. But I've never heard these words used together. This is a new term for me. It may not be completely unknown like some of the other topics I've encountered in TOEFL, but it is something that doesn't have a meaning to me right now before I've read it. So when I'm presented with the reading, my objective is to focus on a definition. The reading will always present a definition for the term mentioned here. Now, when I'm reading and taking notes, I'm scanning quickly with my eyes because I want to zone in on that definition. For me, the definition is the only part of the reading that I'm going to include in my response. So I don't feel stressed if I don't have time to do the reading in full, because my objective is to get that definition. Now, as a reading strategy, again, I can scan quickly with my eyes. The first time that the reading uses the main topic or term, in this case, compassionate consumerism, the definition typically appears right before those words or right after those words. Now, of course, we have a challenge. In the integrated questions, which are 3/4 of the speaking questions, they're integrated. Our goal is to always use as much of our own vocabulary and style, meaning it's not a great approach or strategy to repeat the definition word for word, 100% exactly as it's written in this text. That would be a fairly low level response. If I only repeated exactly the same words that I read in the reading, or the exact same words and phrases that I heard in the lecture. It's pretty low level. You know, I read, I took notes, I listened, I took notes, and I repeated exactly what I heard. I typically tell students, if you're at that level and if you're only repeating exactly what you heard, I think at best you'll score 23 in the speaking section. I think it's hard to achieve 24, 25, 26 or higher without showcasing more of your vocabulary, your words, synonyms, paraphrasing, restatements, which is obviously a more sophisticated kind of response. But let's get back to the definition. Ideally, you want to put a little bit of your own spin on the definition, put a little bit of your words or style. However, you know, you don't want to risk losing or changing the meaning of the term. So perhaps you'll rely mostly on the definition that appears in the text. But again, maybe change a verb, maybe put a little bit of your own vocabulary. So just to go over the structure again, let me share this exam with you. Here we are. Okay, so you would hear some directions, okay? And then you will have approximately 45 or 50 seconds. That timing can vary on the length of the reading. Let's go with you have 45 seconds to read this passage. While you're reading, you're trying to take note on what is the definition for compassionate consumerism. As you're taking note of it, you might try to write it in your own way, or perhaps if you copy exactly what you see, when you present that in your response, you're going to try to put it a little bit into your words and style. And yeah, then the reading will disappear. So let's practice that first step right now. I'm going to go ahead and play the directions for you, and then we'll take 45 seconds to read and take notes. Again, we're focused on what is the definition for compassionate consumerism. So here we go.
Directions. You will now read a short passage and then listen to a lecture on the same topic. You will then be asked a question about the passages. After you hear the question, you will have 30 seconds to prepare your response and 60 seconds to speak. You have 45 seconds to read the passage below. You may begin reading now. Now listen to a lecture about this topic in a business class.
Okay, I'm going to pause there for a moment. Obviously, on the exam, the reading would now disappear and they would proceed directly with the lecture. But because this is a teachable moment, this is a class, we're going to pause and we're going to try to take this step by step. So I mentioned that our job is to identify the definition. And I mentioned that the very first time they use the term compassionate consumerism, the definition typically appears right before that or right after that. So let's look at the beginning of this text. Compassionate consumerism is a relatively new trend in the American retail market. Okay, so they've used the term in the very first sentence, but obviously that first sentence does not provide a definition. It's simply an introduction. Let's look at the second sentence. In this type of consumerism, beep, beep, beep. When individuals make a purchase, a portion of the money they pay is allocated to a charitable cause. Bam, there's our definition. So when I take my notes, that's the phrase that I most focus on. What is compassionate consumerism? It's when individuals make a purchase, a portion of the money they pay is allocated to a charitable cause. Now, perhaps that might not be very familiar to you. Maybe you don't know the word allocated. Maybe you're not quite familiar with a charitable cause. What does that mean exactly? So don't stress at this moment. Remember, if you feel uneasy or uncertain about the definition, that's a really normal feeling. The goal of the lecture part is to illustrate this concept. They're basically going to give you some sort of story-like examples that describe this in great detail. So if you're not super confident with what that definition means, what does it look like? Well, that's going to become much more apparent after listening to the lecture. So don't stress in this moment, just sort of take that knowledge and then, okay, let's go look at it in practice. What is it, by listening to the lecture? What does this actually look like? Now, remember I said focus on the definition and don't stress if you don't have time to read the full reading passage. Because when I do my definition, that's the only part of the reading that I'm going to include in my response. So if you did have time to read, you noticed that they give other details about how there's a little bit of debate, how some people feel that this is just a marketing ploy, sort of like a trick or to get people to make these purchases. And other people think this is a great technique. So they're giving us like a little bit of, controversy about the topic. To me, that's not relevant to your response. So for me, it's the definition is key. Now, in terms of how I begin my response, I do follow a template. I'm going to type here in the chat box. I'm not sure that you can see that. Let me go ahead and use a Word document instead. So the goal of TOEFL speaking is to always be as natural and conversational as possible. Your response should sound like you're sitting in a coffee shop chatting with your girlfriends or chatting with your buddies. Very informal, casual, and cool. And this is true even on the academic tasks. I always advise my students to think of yourself as a storyteller. Try to imagine that you're not just repeating the facts of the lecture, but you're telling a story. So I want to incorporate as much casual, cool style into my response as possible. I typically like to begin with this phrase, so, basically, and then I'll use the term compassionate consumerism is. Okay, so that's my template, the so basically part. Well, why do I begin with that phrase? Beginning a sentence with so in English is a very, very natural way to talk. In fact, I do this all day with my kids. Like, so what do you want for dinner tonight? So what should we play outside today? It's a very natural sounding conversational phrase. Furthermore, I'm a big fan of adverbs. I always advise my students to throw 2 or 3 adverbs in every response. Adverbs are words like really, totally, definitely, absolutely, basically, probably, essentially, likely, interestingly, surprisingly. I can go on and on. I think adverbs can add a lot of good feeling and emotion. And again, they're very natural sounding. So while this isn't a very complicated template, it's just basically 2 words, and then I introduce the theme, the words are selected with care and thought so that they sound natural and informal. So basically, compassionate consumerism is. And then I'm going to try to present that definition. Again, in an ideal situation, I would try to change maybe just 1 or 2 words so that I'm not repeating exactly what I see in the text. All right, let's get back to the lecture now and keep going with this question. So we've got the reading, and then in a normal situation, right after the reading disappears, and then we're given this, now listen to a lecture about this topic in a business class. So why don't we go ahead now and listen to the lecture. Now, your role, obviously, is to take notes. You've got to take notes on the main details presented in the lecture. And for a lot of students, note-taking can be a challenging task. Well, I feel like that's a class in itself. That's a different topic and a different lesson, perhaps, that I can address down the road. But for today's purpose, I'll just encourage you to try to, use some of the note-taking techniques that you know or have, to try to take note of the main ideals of the lecture. Keeping in mind that these lectures are typically, again, close to 2 minutes long. You only have 60 seconds to summarize. So of course, you're not expected to repeat every single detail, but focus on the main ideas. So let me go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and play that lecture for you now, and you should proceed with your note-taking.
Now, as the reading suggests, many companies have embraced the idea of compassionate consumerism over the past few years. Studies show that customers are generally supportive of such efforts, especially very young shoppers. Not only that, but companies make a lot of additional profits from this kind of compassionate marketing. Some companies even thrive off of it. Now, take ABC Shoes, for example. They're kind of like the pioneer of this type of consumerism. You know the shoes, right? Those flat, simple slip-on shoes which are based on a type of traditional Argentinian footwear called an alpargata. Anyway, ABC Shoes achieved a huge market share about 7 years ago with their one-for-one business model. Basically, if you buy a pair of ABC Shoes, they donate another pair of shoes to an impoverished individual. While this program has cost ABC Shoes a lot of money to administer, they've also made so much profit that they've expanded to include not only shoes, but also eyewear and coffee. Speaking of coffee, another famous company that has adopted the compassionate consumerism model is Bob's Coffee. Now, the one-for-one model doesn't make much sense for a cup of coffee, but a portion of the cost of certain items is sometimes donated to various nonprofit organizations. Since Bob's deals closely with coffee bean farmers in South America, they have recently launched a campaign where 10% of all purchases are donated to preserving the South American rainforest. And, would you believe it, on the day they announced the campaign, there was a line out the door at Bob's Coffee right here on campus.
Now, answer the question. Using the examples from the lecture, explain what compassionate consumerism is and how it works. You have 30 seconds to prepare your response. You may begin preparing now.
Okay, so let's get back together here. All right, so let's go back to the presentation. Now we have 30 seconds to prepare our notes, and then we have 1 minute to speak. So yeah, again, I mentioned note-taking, it's hard. Let's go ahead and look at a transcript here. So when you invest in lessons at tstprep.com, you get access to a lot of helpful, supportive resources, including full practice exams. Now, these full practice exams always come with the transcripts of the lecture and full sample responses so that you can help, you can learn, what are the most critical details. So this is the transcript. So you can see that there's some highlighted key points in this transcript. So we have, the lectures often begin with what I like to call sort of like background information. Often the first few sentences of the lecture are not going to be critically important to be included in your summary. You can see visually that we have like an introductory paragraph here, and notice none of it is highlighted as being critically important. Then we jump into the very first example. Now, take ABC Shoes, for example. So in terms of my listening, when I hear a professor say, take something as an example, now I know that's a critical point. Here's my example. And then, of course, there's a description about this company. So we've highlighted that these are slip-on shoes. They're based on a traditional kind of Argentinian footwear. And then they describe how the compassionate consumerism works. If you buy a pair of ABC shoes, they donate another pair of shoes to an impoverished individual. Okay. And then the last key point, they've made so much profit that they've expanded not only to shoes, but also to eyewear and coffee. So you can see the details that have been highlighted as being key and critical about the example for ABC shoes. So then the professor goes on to introduce another illustration of compassionate consumerism. Now in question number 3, it's sort of, I say a toss-up in English, meaning it can go one or two ways. Sometimes in question 3, you're going to have a lecture that's on one topic, one example, and they go into, great detail about that one theme or topic. Other times, you're going to have a lecture like this that gives 2 examples about the theme. In my opinion, this one is a little bit more difficult because you've got to have really good time management so that you can describe both of these examples. So we have ABC shoes, and then we have a phrase, speaking of coffee, another famous company. So bing, bing, bing. Another famous company, they're about to introduce a second example. So in my note taking, oh, okay, another theme, I'm ready. So now we hear about Bob's Coffee. And the portion that we're most focusing on are the key details, which is that a portion of the cost of certain items is sometimes donated to various nonprofit organizations. Since Bob's deals closely with coffee bean farmers in South America, they have recently launched a campaign where 10% of all purchases are donated to preserving the South American rainforest. Okay, so that's the key points that we've identified there. You're expected to think like a teacher. So I often tell my students to imagine that they're a teacher of young children. So I like to envision myself that I'm a teacher sitting in a chair and perhaps the children are all gathered around me on the floor. And I'm trying to present the details of my lecture in a way that there's some sort of amazement, there's some sort of suspense, so that the children, the listeners, are like, tell me more, tell me more. Now, let's be honest, sometimes these lectures are about plants or animals, business, history, whatever. But I still try to identify whichever details of the lecture are like especially interesting or maybe even surprising. And I try to build some suspense and amazement. I try to present the information with some awe, some like wow, so that the listener is not just hearing a repeat of facts from the lecture, but the listener is engaged in my story, in my summary. Okay, so your role is to then identify the topic, define the topic from the reading, elaborate on the topic, and bring it all together with a conclusion. Okay, so key point here, your job is to summarize the information that you're given. At no point should you bring in your own personal opinion. You should not include your own personal life experience, your own examples of this. No. In one sense, you're like a reporter. You're just summarizing the information that was presented to you, okay, without any of your personal opinion or experience. So let's go ahead today and listen to a couple student examples. This is going to help us learn what are some criterias of good examples, what are some things that students are doing well, and what are some areas that need improvement so that we can learn and grow from this as well. So let me share the audio so hopefully you can hear this example well, and let's go ahead and listen to somebody's response about compassionate consumerism.
The reading is about compassionate consumerism. in which a small amount of money from customers' purchase is given to the charity. According to the lecture, various companies adopt compassionate consumerism and customers supports this, and most of the companies make large number of profit. For example, ABC shoes, these are small, simple, traditional shoes, but they made a huge market share, because if you buy a pair of shoes, you don't need, the company will donate the other pair to some needy people, and this program made huge profit. Another example is a famous coffee company, the Bob's Coffee, in which they decided to donate a cost of their items of a portion to a non-profit organization. When the company decided to introduce a campaign to donate 10% of their share to the South American rainforest preservation, there was a huge line of customers.
Okay, so we've got that first sample. Let's go ahead and look at some criteria that we use when we try to analyze responses. So these are some critical things, and we're going to listen to 3 example responses, and I'll highlight some points here. So first of all, we listen for fluency. We listen for a student who speaks at a natural, continuous pace without a lot of utterances of like, or eh, or without any lengthy pauses or hesitations. I think this student did have pretty good fluency. I did not hear a lot of utterances or interruptions. TOEFL speaking tactics basically refers to the organization of a response. Now, I think this organization was quite strong as well. The student began with a definition, and in fact, I thought her definition was quite good. You know, she said something like it was a small amount of money is given to a charity with each purchase. So she didn't directly copy word for word the sentence that appeared in the reading. She changed it just a little bit to put her own spin. After the definition, she dealt with the first topic about ABC shoes. Then she transitioned and addressed the second topic about Bob's Coffee. It felt pretty balanced to me, meaning she spent about equal time developing both examples. Sometimes students spend too much time talking about the first example and then they run out of time. The student did not have time to include a conclusion. Ideally, we do try to put a conclusion in every response, but otherwise her timing, time management, organization was good. This is a tricky one next, accent and intonation. Basically, the person who gets 26 in TOEFL speaking has a very native-like sounding accent and a really strong intonation, that music and rhythm of English. And this is a key point where I think this student is struggling. This student speaks and everything basically sounds the same. Okay, so first of all, some things related to intonation that the student can work on are known as a variation in word stress. I often like to work on this with my students, variation in word stress. Basically, when native speakers talk, some words are more stressed and emphasized. So that's the idea when we pick a few keywords and we make them longer, more dramatic. Now, often students say, what keywords? How do I know? And I often advise my students that really you just want to pick an emotional moment, something that's important to you. You don't have to stress or worry about picking the wrong words or doing something incorrectly. I feel like the wrong approach is to have no variation in stress, to have everything sound the same. So let's take a sentence like this. I don't know. The man wants to study English, but he doesn't have a speaking partner. Okay, let's take this sentence. Now I've read it in a robotic tone. The man wants to study English, but he doesn't have a speaking partner. If I'm going to try to put variation in word stress, I'm going to pick a word that I think is key and meaningful, and I'm going to make that word longer and more dramatic, okay? And That word can vary from person to person. So for instance, I might decide that I want to put word stress and emphasis on English. In that case, the sentence might sound like this. The man wants to study English, but he doesn't have a speaking partner. The man wants to study English, but he doesn't have a speaking partner. Okay, so I took the word English, I made it a little bit longer, more dramatic, not necessarily shouting. I don't want to make it louder, but just more dramatic. But you could also choose a different word that you think is particularly important. For example, I might choose to put stress and emphasis on speaking. The man wants to study English, but he doesn't have a speaking partner. A speaking partner. Okay, and it's not like one of those options is correct and the other option is incorrect. It just means we're putting stress and emphasis to what we think is most critical in the sentence. And I typically do have like a word stress in every sentence or every so often. Another part of variation in word stress is that we take things that don't have a lot of content, don't have a lot of meaning, and we blend or link those things together. So now I'm talking about things like articles, a, and the, prepositions, helping verbs, modals, conjunctions, things such as this that don't have a lot of critical meaning. Let's take an example sentence like, I have to go to the store. Okay, very robotic tone there. A native speaker is going to blend and link these words in one continuous breath because we have prepositions, we have articles, you know, there's not a lot of critical, heavy meaning in these words. So it would sound like this. I have to go to the store. I have to go to the store. I have to go to the store. So you're not individually hearing the full, complete utterance of each word. I have to go to the store. I have to go to the store. They're blended and linked together. So those are two key parts of intonation. And when I listened to the student in this sample response number 1, I felt that her intonation could use some training and development to have that better music and rhythm. The next thing is pace of speech. I thought she spoke, again, continuously, and it was a pretty good pace of speech. Emotional connection is key. What I wrote down in my notes was I felt her tone was very factual. She was repeating details from the lecture, but she wasn't emotionally connecting. So take, for instance, there were some emotionally heavy moments. For example, she talked about how the company can make huge profits. She talked about how successful these compassionate consumerism programs have been, but she was lacking that passion and excitement in the sound of her voice. She just said, ABC shoes have made a huge profit, okay? Or versus ABC shoes have made huge profits following the compassionate consumerism model. You know, there's a whole different level of energy there. Spoken grammar, okay, I didn't take note of too many grammatical issues. Confidence. For me, this response, you know, it sort of, to me, connects so hand in hand. In English, we say they go together. You know, confidence, emotional, it's all part, they're all related. So to me, the response didn't sound at that level of confidence that I want to hear, because it was missing that, you know, feeling and emotion that I expect to hear on a response, okay? So let's go ahead and look at another student example and see what we can learn from this one. Okay, so I'm going to share the audio with you again. And here goes student example number 2.
One interesting thing that I learned from the reading is that compassionate consumerism is a new trend in the American market, especially in the retail area. In the lecture, the professor delves deeper into this subject by providing an example of compassionate consumerism. To start, the lecturer explains that contrary to the well-being of humanity is a reason of compassionate consumerism. One example of that is that here in Colombia, for example, Starbucks has a foundation to help poor people in order to get their academic goals. Secondly, he explains that compassionate consumerism sacrifices the profits of the company. For instance, Argos, our building company, it helps their employee to have a better life because if they provide an extra salary.
Okay, let me come back to you guys here. And let's go look at that criteria so we can analyze this response. Okay, so we are going to deal with fluency. This speaker, again, didn't have a lot of uhs and pauses. I don't think that's an area of concern here. TOEFL speaking tactics. The big issue, we sometimes call it the elephant in the room, the issue that needs to be addressed, and sometimes it's ignored. I don't see where it would connect. Maybe I'll throw it into this TOEFL speaking tactics. Perhaps when you listen to that example, you might have had the same reaction as I did, which was, wait, what? He mentioned Starbucks. Did he mean to mention Bob's Coffee? Oh no, wait, what? He's talking about Columbia. Okay, now he's talking about a building company. Okay, so for me, that response definitely threw me back for a moment because his content did not follow the content that I was expecting here. So this is a wonderful teachable moment. This is the opportunity where I have to say, thank you, student, for making this error in a safe learning environment like now, not in a costly time on the TOEFL exam. And that's going to allow so many students to learn from this moment and, not do the same thing in the future. So let me repeat the expectation. Your job on this question is to provide a definition of a term and then to summarize the information that was presented to you in the lecture. At no point should you include your opinion, your personal experience, or any personal examples that you've encountered. So for me, when I listened to this response, I was just like, whoa, that's not at all what I expected to hear. And I actually reached out to our website owner, Josh McPherson, and I said, whoa, what do you think about this? What happens in this moment? And the two of us got into an interesting discussion. We believe, we're pretty certain on this one, that TOEFL raters obviously would reduce the student's score for having inappropriate content. However, we both seem to agree that it's not automatically a 0. Okay, because the student did produce a response, there is language to be scored and evaluated, but there would certainly be some sort of penalty. And we don't know exactly how heavily that would weigh, but imagine the TOEFL rater, deemed that this response is a 2, well, they would likely get a 1 because again, the content was inappropriate. So there would be some sort of penalty. So, okay, let's talk about some other things. Accent and intonation. I wrote down a number of words that I felt the student was mispronouncing. One of the key words I wrote down was the. A lot of students struggle with that TH sound, and it's such a useful sound on TOEFL. We always say the, this, these, that, those. So I thought that word was problematic. This student is making use of some templates that probably he learned through the TST program. So I liked the templates, but for instance, he's trying to say a phrase delves deeper into, and I didn't think that phrase was pronounced very well. I wrote down the phrase to start, secondly, employees, sacrifice, extra. I wrote down the word stress, compassionate consumerism. There were a number of pronunciation errors. And so much so that as the listener, I had to really focus and listen. What is the person saying? What is he trying to say? Okay, and obviously for an optimal performance, the accent needs to be, you know, very, very comprehensible. We have to be able to easily understand everything that's being said. So I think that's an area of concern. Okay. I think this student did have a fair pace of speech, maybe a little bit on the slow side. There was more emotional connection in this response. I did feel a bit of energy and passion, especially maybe because he was including personal experiences and his, you know, that were important to him. And there seemed to be a little bit of a confidence again. I got more of a passionate connection because it felt like the person was talking about real concrete examples. However, the response was still very problematic, especially because the content was so, inappropriate. Okay, so that's a key moment that we all can learn from. The student also didn't have time for a conclusion. Okay, let's go ahead and listen to one last example together. So let's listen to example number 3. And here we go.
According to the text, compassionate consumerism is a new trend in which a portion from a customer's payment is transferred to charity. Although critics claim that it is only a marketing trick, other individuals believe that it is a positive phenomenon to sacrifice profit to people in need. The professor illustrates the concept by providing several examples. It is made clear in the lecture that customers are supportive of this idea and some companies make huge profits out of this trend. For example, if a client purchases a pair of ABC shoes, this company donates another pair to a poor person. As a result, ABC has made a lot of profit and extended its range of goods till eyewear and coffee. Then the professor mentions Bob's Coffee, a company which deals with coffee bean farmers in South America. In one of their recent campaigns, 10% of all purchases have been donated to preserving the South American rainforest.
Okay, so let's discuss this one together. Here we go. Okay, let's go back to that criteria list. Okay, so I thought the student had a good, demonstrated a strong fluency. There weren't ums and uhs, and she spoke continuously. She also had a good organization. She had a nice, strong definition. She dealt with ABC shoes. She then transitioned to Bob's Coffee. And yeah, I liked her templated phrases, her structure and approach. Accent and intonation are tough again. So one of the things again relating to intonation is their music and rhythm. Basically, one of the things I listen for is that a typical English sentence, the intonation should go down at the end of the sentence. There should be some sort of completion or closure of that thought before the speaker begins a new idea. And I felt like this had just a very continuous sort of tone. Like basically all the sentences just sort of sounded the same and they all blended from one to the next. So for me, I would work with the student on that intonation, having a better music and rhythm to show closure of certain of sentences and beginnings of the next sentences. Accent is challenging as well. At TST Prep, we are prepared to work with students from all over the world. And we have, nationality guides. We have training for pronunciation for speakers from various native languages. So there are certain common struggles that speakers of Russian face, for example. So we would work with students on tongue twisters and other kind of training to help train your mouth and positions of your mouth to help form letters and sounds in a more native-like way. In terms of pace of speech, I thought that this student did have a really nice pace of speech. She spoke continuously, just like a native speaker would. Emotional connection. For me, it wasn't quite there. Everything felt very, very factual. Again, there were moments like the company made huge profits out of this trend. Okay, so a sentence like that, the company made huge profits out of this trend. Okay, music and rhythm. So I think the emotional connection piece was lacking. Spoken grammar was excellent. I didn't take notes of any grammatical errors at all. And the confidence, I would say it was pretty good because, again, I thought this was a strong response. For me, the issues of this response were the sound of the response. The content was excellent. The delivery was pretty good. I'm mostly concerned about the lack of emotional connection and accent and intonation issues. Okay, so we can definitely learn and grow. Let's go ahead and look at an example response. So I share this response with you from our TST Prep website. Again, when you buy lessons, you can get access to complete practice exams. The exams will always come with full transcripts as well as example responses. In this example response, you can see certain pieces are underlined. These are various templates. Now, each person sort of has their own approach and style. We like to say that there's not one template that fits all. Some students like this kind of structure, and other students have other templates in mind. So I think that's the beauty of working with a TST instructor, is you're going to get varieties of templates, and that you can choose and sort of, create the one that feels most comfortable to you. So I mentioned earlier that I typically begin with a phrase like, so basically, and I give my definition. Here, Josh is suggesting an opening sentence like, according to the reading. Okay, another good option. So in terms of templated phrases, we've got, according to the reading. In the lecture, the professor delves deeper into the subject by. So that's that phrase I mentioned earlier that we heard one of our students using in that sample response. The student introduces the first idea by using the phrase to start. Okay, nice natural phrase there. Another example mentioned in the lecture, and then that concluding piece. So, okay, so there's a sentence beginning with so, just like I advised at the beginning. So after listening, I now have a better understanding of what compassionate consumerism is. So yeah, we do try to put a conclusion in every response. Now, I personally follow a little bit of a variation of a template. So this is one possible style, but if you wanted to hear other templates and other approaches, again, that's the beauty and benefit of meeting with a TOEFL professional. So yeah, you could learn that from me another time. So yeah, this is a nice example response that you can look over. You can even visually see that the summary has nice balance. We've got that brief definition. Then we have, maybe 2 or 3 sentences about ABC shoes, 2 or 3 sentences about Bob's coffee. I can even visually see that the text is about the same for both subjects. And then we try to squeeze in that conclusion at the end. Okay, let's sort of revisit the 4 critical things for success. Your goal is to sound natural and conversational. Again, even though this is an academic topic, I try to treat it with a storytelling like energy, with a lot of emotional connection in my voice. Yes, you have to read an academic passage, listen to an academic lecture, and you have to speak both. For me, I advise you to just, from the reading part, pull out the definition. Okay, that's going to be the key piece of the reading, and the majority of your response will focus on summarizing the academic lecture. You have 60 seconds to speak. I would first begin with the reading by beginning with a definition. That's how you sort of introduce the topic or theme, and then the majority of your response will be on the lecture. And you should think of yourself like a teacher. You are explaining this in a story-like, engaging sort of manner. You're not just repeating facts from a lecture. Well, I hope that we accomplished the goals that I set out for today. I wanted you to gain a deeper understanding of how to approach TOEFL speaking question number 3. I hope you were able to discover some differences between a high and low level response, and how you can use other sample responses to analyze and learn and grow your own responses. I want to remind you of that special promotion that's going on. Take advantage of this opportunity. Only $9 for you to get private professional TOEFL help. Again, we're here to help you get your TOEFL score as quickly and easily as possible. And the first great step is to invest in a TOEFL speaking evaluation. There you'll meet me and I will be able to identify your weak points and give you a very specific plan to help you address and improve those weak areas. You can see a positive experience from a student that I worked with, Irene. I had an evaluation with Jamie Tansman 3 days before my test. She's really awesome. Thanks. She was able to determine my weaknesses. Plus, she gave me great tips. I followed her advice and I got 28 out of 30 in the speaking section. Well, I want to put a little caution. Obviously, this is not going to be true for everyone. It's best not to, wait until 3 days before your exam, get some 30 minutes of advice and walk in there and get almost a perfect score in speaking. Obviously, Irene had some really good skills before she met me, and I was able to, just give her that perfect balance of advice and strategies to help her in a short amount of time. In the best situation, you want to invest in your evaluation when you have time to make significant improvement and growth so that you can maximize your potential and your performance on your exam. So those are my thoughts to share with you today. Again, I'm Jamie. Go to our website, www.tstprep.com. Check out the TOEFL store, see what kind of great products we have to offer, and let a TOEFL professional guide you to help you get your score as quickly and easily as possible. Thanks for watching today, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.